15-year-old model in a hotel room, cocaine, alcohol, and private auditions with guys he collected, $700 million for a brand he was running from, collapse, rehab, he built an empire, and then he disappeared. This is not just a story about fashion, it's a story about the dark side of fame, sex, addiction, and the price you pay when you become a brand. Kelvin Richard Klein was born in the Bronx in 1942. His mother was a style enthusiast, and his father owned a grocery store. As a child, Kelvin didn't play baseball with the neighborhood kids. Instead, he sat with a needle in his hand, sewing dresses for imaginary clients. Strange? Maybe. But even then, he wasn't dreaming of fame. He was dreaming of influence. They say Kelvin was obsessed with cleanliness, control, and aesthetics from a young age. Even at 13, he would iron his handkerchiefs meticulously, and he was quiet. Very quiet. Some relatives suspected he wasn't just shy, but lived in a world of his own, a parallel reality. During his school years, Kelvin had a secret affair with his art teacher, the one who encouraged him to apply to the Fashion Institute of Technology. That relationship was later hushed up, but the whispers echoed through the back halls of New York's fashion scene for years. After FIT, Klein didn't jump straight into big business. He carried his sketches under his arm, knocking on factory doors, asking for a chance. One day, he accidentally walked into the office of Bonwit Teller, and that random encounter became the beginning of his rise. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Ahead lay sex, drugs, advertising that shocked America, and ties to the most unexpected celebrities. Some say it was Kelvin who helped a young Mark Wahlberg clear his criminal record and become the face of Kelvin Klein because he saw in him a danger that sells. Late 70s. New York, the city that never sleeps, especially if you're Kelvin Klein. He was already on the rise. His clothes were worn by the rich, and his minimalist, sexy suits were selling like hotcakes. But the real revolution was still ahead. At night, he disappeared into Studio 54, the legendary nightclub where sex, cocaine, and celebrities blended into one neon fever dream. He could be seen with Andy Warhol, Bianca Jagger, Michael Jackson, and, sometimes, with someone who looked a little too young to be in the club, but no one asked questions. It was the 70s. In 1978, Klein allegedly almost lost his license to the brand after he was detained in a hotel with a 15-year-old model whom the police considered to be missing. Klein got off with a fine and silence, but the industry was still buzzing. But he didn't stop. Kelvin found a new weapon: sex. He launched ads with young models in lingerie. When Brooke Shields, who was only 15 at the time, appeared on the screens in Klein's jeans and whispered, "Do you know what comes between me and my Kelvins?" Nothing. America exploded. Feminists, religious groups, politicians, everyone called for a boycott of the brand, but sales soared. Brooke Shields allegedly admitted years later that Kelvin asked her to make the ads more intimate because the camera needs to feel that you're naked. Her mother later accused the brand of body trafficking under the guise of fashion. But despite the scandals, he moved on. In 1982, he launched an underwear collection that revolutionized the industry. Simple white underpants with the Kelvin Klein logo become a symbol of sex. And then comes the main weapon, Mark Wahlberg. A teenager with a criminal past, Mark becomes the face of CK's advertising campaign, posing half-naked next to Kate Moss. The image contains tension, eroticism, and the line between what is permitted and what is forbidden. Mark and Kelvin are said to have had a special relationship backstage. Wahlberg himself avoided commenting, and Klein, in his usual manner, simply smiled. Anything sexy sells. The beginning of the 90s. Kelvin Klein is at his peak. His underpants are worn by everyone from celebrities to schoolchildren. He himself is in every glossy magazine. But backstage is a real nightmare. To keep up the pace, to be in style, to keep his energy up, he takes more and more every day. First cocaine, then tranquilizers, and finally alcohol in uncontrolled doses. He can no longer attend meetings sober. Employees recall how he would come to meetings without realizing where he was or who was around him. One of the brand's managers said in a private interview that Kelvin once locked himself in the office, withdrawing all security, and did not come out for several days, only asking for bottles of Perrier and something to inspire him. translated with deepl.com, free version. In 1995, everything crashes. Calvin Klein publicly admits to addiction and checks into the Betty Ford Clinic. Some sympathize. Others whisper, he won't come out the same. They were right. He came out sharper, bolder, more provocative than ever. Fresh out of rehab, he dives back into fashion and scandal. In 1998, new photos surface. Klein strolling with a teenage male model who looked no older than 16. Tabloids scream, "Klein back on the edge." In the memoir of one of Klein's former lovers, he allegedly collected boys and hosted private castings at his Manhattan loft. It was never confirmed, but the story leaked to Vanity Fair. But the biggest drama was yet to come. His relationship with Nick Gruber, a boy 46 years younger. They were inseparable. Red carpets, restaurants, poolside in Manhattan. The problem? Klein refused to call it a relationship. It was an addiction of a different kind. Rumors say Nick blackmailed Klein, selling intimate details of their nights together to tabloids for thousands of dollars. In 2005, one magazine reportedly got hold of an audio recording where Klein begs, "Please don't destroy what's left of me." The press started calling him the man with a secret. Even fans weren't sure anymore. Was this still a brand or just emotional wreckage in designer clothing? And yet, even broken, even high, Calvin remained the king of fashion. Then came the shock. He sold the empire. While Calvin teetered on the edge of collapse, his brand had become a machine, one even he couldn't stop. Calvin Klein had become synonymous with sex, and not metaphorically. Ad campaigns featuring barely legal models staring seductively into the lens sparked national outrage and record sales. 1992. The now infamous underwear shoot with Kate Moss and Mark Wahlberg. The world stops. It wasn't just advertising. It was a social experiment. Nothing gets between me and my Calvins. The line became a generational slogan. But years later, a crew member confessed. Moss cried after every take. She was just 17. The atmosphere? Hypersexualized and deeply uncomfortable. The brand expanded aggressively. Calvin Klein jeans, Calvin Klein underwear, CK1, the unisex fragrance that sold worldwide. At its peak, CK was raking in $5 million a day from perfume alone. But behind the scenes, cracks began to show. Some doubted whether Calvin could still make strategic decisions. He vanished from meetings, spent more time with models than executives. In 1996, the board of Calvin Klein Inc. held a closed-door meeting. The topic? Whether to remove Calvin as creative director due to his increasingly erratic behavior. But they backed down. The name was still too powerful, too valuable to risk. And yet, Calvin Klein in the 90s was financially untouchable. Multi-million-dollar contracts with Warnaco and Unilever kept the cash flowing. His ad campaigns, though slammed for hypersexual imagery, won awards and sold millions of units. It was a double life. The brand was thriving. Calvin, the man, was disappearing. When he finally returned from rehab, the world expected a comeback, a second act. Instead, he did the unthinkable. He decided to sell the empire he had built from nothing. In 2002, Calvin Klein pulled off the impossible. He sold the brand that bore his name. To the world, it was a shock. To him, it was survival. "It wasn't mine anymore. I lost myself inside what I created," he admitted in one of his rare interviews. The official story? PVH Corp bought the company for $400 million in cash and another $300 million in stock options and royalties. But this was more than a business deal. It was a quiet surrender. A year before the sale, Klein had held secret talks with LVMH, but Bernard Arnault reportedly walked away, calling him too unstable for a long-term investment. The reasons for the sale were personal, financial, and deeply philosophical. By then, Calvin no longer controlled the empire. Licensing deals for jeans, fragrances, underwear, all managed by corporate partners. He remained just a face, a name. Meanwhile, addiction, heartbreak, the burnout of being Calvin Klein, it was all eating him alive. I couldn't even walk into my own office anymore. Strangers were sitting at my desk. People either feared me or ignored me. One former employee revealed that, in the final week before the deal, Klein spent his days alone in his office, listening to classical music, quietly flipping through his archive sketches. Despite the scale of the sale, for Kelvin, it wasn't a triumph. It was a surrender. He didn't just sell a brand, he sold his identity. After that, Kelvin disappeared from the public eye. For the first time in decades, he missed Fashion Week. No interviews, no new collections. There were whispers, rumors that Klein had moved to Italy, where he'd secretly opened a rehab villa for celebrities, but never treated anyone. He only watched. Eventually, he reappeared, in a suit with gray hair and a calm face, sitting in the front row as an honored guest. But it wasn't the same Kelvin. No scandals, no drugs, no provocative ad campaigns. After selling the brand, Kelvin Klein didn't retire. He vanished. No farewell tour, no press tears. One of the most influential designers of the 20th century simply stopped existing in the image he'd built for himself. He was no longer at red carpet premieres. Not on Instagram, not even in the front rows of fashion shows, the same shows he once dominated with his stare and presence. In 2005, he was reportedly spotted in the deserts of New Mexico, taking part in a spiritual cleansing ritual with shamans. He sold his New York apartment, rarely showed up at his own office, and for years the media kept asking, "Is Kelvin Klein still alive?" His PR team offered vague responses. Mr. Klein is well and resting. But the truth was simpler. He was tired of playing his own character. When the world spends 30 years photographing half-naked bodies and calling you a sex god, you start to feel empty inside. He once told a close friend, he was no longer Kelvin Klein. He became simply Cal, a man fascinated by architecture, interior design, and modern art. He bought a house in Los Angeles overlooking the ocean and spent his days redrawing old sketches. I'd look at things I once created and ask myself, was that really me? In the 2000s and 20s, he only appears now and then as a fashion legend, a veteran of the industry, a ghost of a great era. But Kelvin says, "I don't want to come back. I did what I was meant to do. I have nothing left to prove."